I was staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown office when my lawyer slid a heavy, untraceable burner phone across the mahogany desk. "Call your parents," Royce said, his voice dead serious. "Tell them you just lost $20 million. If you don't do exactly as I say, you're going to prison." Up until a rainy Tuesday in November, I believed I was the architect of my own life. My name is Amory Patterson. At 34, I was the founder and CEO of Patterson Capital, a boutique algorithmic trading firm based in Chicago. We managed a respectable portfolio, heavily leaning into predictive analytics, and I had built it from the ground up. I was the golden boy of my family, the first to break out of the middle-class mold. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Patterson, were retired public school teachers living in a modest, vinyl-sided colonial in a quiet suburb of Milwaukee. Growing up, money was tight but love wasn't. They drove used cars, clipped grocery coupons, and saved for years to put me through college. When I decided to start my firm, they liquidated a chunk of their retirement savings to loan me $50,000 as seed money. I paid them back with interest within 3 years, but I never forgot their sacrifice. They were my heroes. That illusion shattered at 10:14 a.m. I was in the middle of a risk assessment meeting when my CFO, David Hastings, burst into the conference room. He didn't knock. His face was the color of wet ash. "Amory," David stammered, his eyes darting toward the junior analysts sitting around the table. "We need to clear the room. Now." Once the door clicked shut behind the confused staff, David dropped a thick stack of printed ledgers onto the glass table. The clearinghouse just froze all our Tier 1 operational accounts. The SEC issued a summary suspension on our primary trading license. Amory, $20 million was transferred out of our holding accounts at 3 a.m., routed through 3 offshore entities, and vanished. My stomach dropped into my shoes. "What? That's impossible." Our internal safeguards required dual-factor authorization from both of us for anything over $1 million. "I know," David whispered, terrified. "But the authorization didn't come from a hack. It came from the top down. It used your personal encryption key. The feds are already swarming our prime broker. They think you're embezzling." Before I could even process the words, the heavy oak door of my office swung open again. It wasn't the FBI. It was Royce Mitchell. Royce was a senior partner at Mitchell, Hayes and Carmichael, a white-shoe corporate defense firm. He was an incredibly expensive, ruthlessly efficient bulldog of a lawyer whom I retained strictly for compliance oversight. Royce was a man who wore $5,000 suits and never smiled. He also never visited clients in person, unless the situation was apocalyptic. He walked in, locked the door behind him, and immediately pulled the battery out of his smartphone, setting it on the table. He looked at David. "Mr. Hastings, leave us. Do not speak to anyone in the bullpen. Do not check your email. And do not call your wife." David swallowed hard and fled the room. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Royce, I didn't authorize any transfer. My key must have been compromised. We need to call the authorities." "Sit down, Amory," Royce barked, pointing a manicured finger at the leather chair opposite my desk. "The authorities are already drafting a warrant for your arrest. Wire fraud, money laundering, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." "RICO?" I gasped, falling back into my chair. "I run a legitimate trading firm." Royce opened his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "You run a trading firm that, as of 3 a.m. this morning, served as the final rinse cycle for $20 million of cartel drug money. And the paper trail leads directly, undeniably, to you." He spread the documents across my desk. I stared at bank statements from institutions I had never heard of, accounts in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and the Isle of Man. All of them bore my name, my social security number, and my exact signature. "I've never seen these in my life," I said, my voice trembling. "This is identity theft. Someone set me up." "I know they did," Royce said, leaning forward, resting his hands on the desk. I've been tracking an anomaly in your firm's blind trust structures for 6 months. I hired private investigators when things didn't add up during your quarterly compliance review. The money didn't just vanish today, Amory. It was pulled to protect someone because the feds are closing in. Protect who? Who has my personal data, my SSN, my mother's maiden name, my childhood addresses? Who could build an entire shadow financial network in my name without me knowing? Royce stared at me. His silence was heavier than any accusation. No, I whispered, feeling the blood drain from my face. No, Royce, you're insane. My parents are retired teachers. My dad spends his weekends building birdhouses. My mum volunteers at the local library. Your father, Thomas Patterson, was an accountant for a regional logistics company before he supposedly became a teacher, Royce said coldly. A logistics company that was indicted in 1994 for moving contraband across the Canadian border. Charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. Your parents moved, changed careers, and lived a completely unremarkable life. Too unremarkable. They are ghosts, Amory. And ghosts make the best money launderers. You're lying, I snapped, anger finally breaking through the panic. They gave me my seed money from their pensions. They gave you seed money from a shell company in Delaware, Royce corrected. They funded your firm so they could use your legitimate business as a pristine, high-volume front. You were their unknowing shield. And now that the FBI has found a thread, they are burning your firm down to sever the connection to themselves. They took the $20 million, pinned the breach on your credentials, and left you holding the bag. I felt physically sick. The room began to spin. The people who tucked me in at night, who cheered at my Little League games, who cried with pride at my college graduation, my lawyer was accusing them of setting me up for a federal prison sentence. I don't believe you, I said, tears prickling the corners of my eyes. I know my parents. Royce didn't argue. He just reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a cheap, plastic burner phone, and slid it across the mahogany desk. Then prove me wrong, Royce said, his voice dead serious. Call your parents. Tell them you just lost $20 million in a catastrophic margin call. Tell them you embezzled it. It's gone, and you are going to be arrested. If they are innocent, they will panic, cry, and tell you to go to the police. He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto mine. But if I'm right, what they say next will change everything. Make the call, Amory. If you don't do exactly as I say, you're going to prison. My hand shook as I reached for the burner phone. The plastic felt cheap and alien against my palm. I stared at the keypad, my mind desperately trying to rationalize a way out of this nightmare. Royce, if I make this call and say I committed a crime, and the feds are already watching me, I'm just handing them a confession. This phone is on a scrambled network routing through a server in Stockholm, Royce replied, tapping his pen on the desk. I have a localized jammer active in this room. The FBI isn't hearing this. Only I am. He pressed a button on a small, sleek audio recorder and set it next to the phone. Put it on. Speaker. I swallowed the lump of sheer terror in my throat and dialed the familiar 414 area code. The numbers I had called 1,000 times on Sundays to talk about football, the weather, and my mum's garden. The phone rang. Ring. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Me, my mom, and my dad on a fishing trip in Door County just 2 years ago. My dad was smiling, holding up a small bass, his grey hair blowing in the wind. He wore a faded Green Bay Packers sweatshirt. Criminals didn't look like that. Masterminds didn't live in a 3-bedroom house with a leaky roof. Ring. They're probably out, I whispered, a sudden wave of desperate hope washing over me. My dad has his woodworking class on Tuesdays. Click. Hello? It was my mother. Her voice was warm, familiar, and instantly comforting. Mom? My voice cracked. I didn't have to act terrified. I was paralyzed with fear. Mom, it's Amory. Artie. Oh, sweetheart, it's so good to hear from you. You sound out of breath, honey. I looked up at Royce. He was staring at me, his face utterly expressionless. He gave me a sharp nod. Do it. Mom, I'm in trouble. I'm in so much trouble, I stammered, letting the genuine panic bleed into my words. I made a mistake. A massive mistake. Slow down, Artie. What kind of mistake? Did you and Sarah have a fight? No, Mom. It's the firm. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was heavily over-leveraged on a massive short position. The market inverted. I got a margin call I couldn't cover. I panicked. Okay, my mom said. Her tone was still maternal. Soothing. Money can be replaced, Amory. You're a smart boy. You'll rebuild. No, Mom, you don't understand, I cried, gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I took money. Client money. $20 million. I tried to use it to float the margin. But the broker liquidated the position. It's gone. The 20 million is completely gone. The clearinghouse just froze my accounts and my CFO is talking to the SEC. I'm going to jail. Mom, I stopped. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the tears. I waited for my mother, the sweet woman who cried when Mufasa died in The Lion King, to completely break down. Silence stretched over the line. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. The silence wasn't the silence of shock. It was the heavy, calculating silence of a machine processing new data. When she finally spoke, the warmth was completely gone. The maternal lilt had vanished, replaced by a voice so flat, cold, and razor-sharp it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Amory. Listen to me very carefully. Which client accounts did you pull from? Did you touch the domestic Tier 2 funds, or did you bridge the Cayman reserves? The air in my lungs turned to ice. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't tell me to call a lawyer. She knew about the Cayman reserves. I didn't even know I had Cayman reserves until 10 minutes ago. I couldn't form words. I looked at Royce. He closed his eyes for a brief second, a grim confirmation of his own terrible theory. Amory, stop stammering, my mother commanded, her voice dropping an octave. Did you use the offshore relay? Yes. I lied, reading off the documents Royce had placed in front of me. Horizon Trust. I moved it through Horizon. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then, a muffled voice in the background. It was my father. Who is it? His faint voice asked. It's the boy. He burned Horizon. He says he lost 20, trying to cover a short. Give me the phone. The phone shuffled. Amory, my father said. His voice was gravelly, devoid of any paternal warmth. It sounded like a stranger wearing my father's vocal cords. Are the feds in the building? No, I choked out. Not yet. But David said they're at the prime broker. All right, you have a narrow window. Listen to my instructions and do not deviate. You are going to take your backup hard drive. You are going to microwave it. You are going to walk out the back freight elevator. Do not take your car. You will take a taxi to the Amtrak station and buy a ticket to Minneapolis using cash. Dad. What's happening? Why do you know about Horizon? We don't have time for your bleeding heart, Amory. My father snapped. It was a tone of absolute authority, one I had never heard him use in 34 years. We seeded you. We built that firm to clean the syndicate's capital. Horizon was the holding pen for the Juarez payout. If you lost that 20 million, it's not the SEC you need to worry about. They won't arrest you, Amory. They will put a bullet in the back of your head. I stopped breathing. The office around me felt like it was dissolving. We are initiating the burn protocol, my father continued, his voice terrifyingly calm. We'll handle the cleaners. The identity files we set up for you in 2018, under the name Elias Thorne, are active. The passport is in the false bottom of your golf bag in your hall closet. My golf bag, the one he bought me for my birthday in 2018. Dad, you used me. The betrayal ripped out of my throat, raw and agonizing. My whole life, my business. It was all a front for a cartel. Grow up, Amory. My mother's voice cut back in from an extension. We bought you a life of luxury. You're a millionaire because we allowed it. Now, you've endangered the entire network because of your incompetence. We'll send someone to extract you. Throw this phone away. Click. The dial tone hummed through the speaker, echoing in the deafening silence of my office. I stared at the phone. My vision blurred as tears finally spilled over my cheeks. Everything I was, everything I had achieved, was a lie. My parents weren't retired teachers. They were ghosts, and they had built me up just to be a sacrificial lamb. Royce reached over, pressed the button to end the recording, and slipped the device into his pocket. I'm sorry, Amory, Royce said. And for the first time, his voice held a sliver of genuine empathy. I truly am. I buried my face in my hands. What do we do? Royce, they said the cartel is going to kill me. They said I need to run. You aren't running anywhere, Royce said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. They think you lost the money. They don't know that they actually successfully moved it at 3 a.m., and they don't know that I have the digital fingerprints proving they initiated the transfer. I looked up confused. If they moved it, why did they think I lost it? Because, Royce said, his eyes narrowing, they aren't the top of the food chain. Amory. They are middle management. They stole that 20 million from the cartel last night, and they were going to use your impending arrest as the perfect cover story. They set you up to take the fall for their theft. He pulled out a secondary file from his briefcase. Your parents are boarding a private jet at Mitchell International Airport in exactly 2 hours. But we are going to make sure they don't take off. I sat frozen in my leather chair, the air in my office suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. The man who taught me how to ride a bike and the woman who baked me birthday cakes were currently orchestrating my demise to cover a $20 million theft from a drug syndicate. They're leaving. I choked out, the reality of the betrayal finally piercing through my shock. They're just going to fly away and let me get murdered or thrown in a federal penitentiary. That is exactly their plan, Amory, Royce said, snapping his briefcase shut. They booked a Gulfstream G400 out of the signature flight support terminal at Mitchell International in Milwaukee. The flight plan is filed for Geneva, with a refueling stop in Reykjavik. They used a shell corporation, Crestview Holdings, to charter it. How do you know all this, Royce? I asked, looking at my fiercely guarded lawyer with a new mix of awe and suspicion. You're a corporate defense attorney. You handle SEC compliance, not cartel tracking. Royce sighed, unbuttoning his suit jacket and sitting on the edge of my desk. 6 months ago, when I first noticed the irregularities in your offshore routing, I didn't go to private investigators right away. I went to a contact I have at FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. His name is Supervisory Special Agent Gregory Campbell. I recognize the acronym. FinCEN was the absolute highest level of financial federal authority. If they were involved, my life as I knew it was already over. Campbell and I went to law school together at Georgetown. Royce continued, his voice low and steady. He owes me a favor. I showed him the blind trusts. He ran them through a classified treasury database and hit a match. Your firm, Patterson Capital, was sharing IP routing addresses with known front companies for the Sinaloa cartel's money laundering operations in the Midwest. My God, I whispered, dragging my hands down my face. The FBI has been building a RICO case against your parents for 4 months, Amory. They tapped their phones. They tracked their bank accounts. But your parents are professionals. They operate entirely in the shadows. The only vulnerability they had was the money itself. Campbell knew they were planning a massive final extraction. We just didn't know when they would pull the trigger. Until last night, I said, the pieces snapping together with sickening clarity. Exactly. At 3 a.m., They initiated a wire transfer using your encrypted credentials. They moved $20 million from the cartel's holding accounts, routed it through your firm to make it look like an embezzled margin cover, and washed it into a decentralized cryptocurrency ledger. They thought they were being brilliant. They thought they were framing you to take the fall for the missing cartel money, buying themselves enough time to disappear to Switzerland. Royce stood up and checked his Rolex. But they made one fatal error. They didn't know I had Campbell monitoring the exact subroutine they used. The FBI intercepted the encryption keys at 3:04 a.m. The $20 million didn't go to their crypto wallet. Campbell diverted it into a federal holding account. Your parents think they are flying away rich. In reality, they are flying away empty-handed, and the cartel already knows the money is gone. Panic flared in my chest again. If the cartel knows the money is gone, they're going to come for me. My dad just told me to go to Minneapolis and hide. That wasn't to hide you, Amory, Royce said, his tone turning remarkably gentle. Minneapolis was a trap. They were sending you to a secondary location where the cartel's cleaners would find you. Your death would tie up the loose ends perfectly. The cartel would think you stole the money. You'd be dead. And Thomas and Margaret Patterson would vanish like ghosts. I felt bile rise in my throat. I grabbed the sleek metal trash can next to my desk and vomited. My own parents. My own flesh and blood. Royce handed me a box of tissues from my desk. Wipe your mouth, Amory. We have a helicopter waiting on the roof of the Aon Center. We are flying to Milwaukee. You are going to look them in the eye when the FBI slaps the cuffs on them. The helicopter ride from Chicago to Milwaukee took less than 40 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the rotor blades mirrored the violent pounding in my skull. I stared out the window at the grey, churning waters of Lake Michigan, mourning the parents I thought I had. When we touched down at a private helipad near Mitchell International, a black Chevrolet Suburban was waiting for us. The back door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark windbreaker stepped out. He flashed a gold badge. "Mr. Patterson," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "I'm Special Agent Campbell. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "Are they here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They arrived at the signature terminal 15 minutes ago," Campbell said, gesturing for Royce and me to get into the SUV. "My tactical team has the perimeter secured. We're moving in now. Royce said you wanted to be there." "I need to see them," I said, my jaw clenched. "I need to see it for myself." The Suburban tore across the tarmac, bypassing the main commercial runways and heading toward the cluster of private hangars. As we pulled up to a sleek, glass-fronted lounge area, I saw a pristine white Gulfstream jet idling on the concrete, its engines emitting a high-pitched whine. We walked through the sliding glass doors of the terminal. The lobby smelled of expensive espresso and aviation fuel, and there they were. If I hadn't been looking directly at them, I wouldn't have recognized them. The cozy, middle-class aesthetic was entirely gone. My mother, who usually wore oversized cardigans and practical New Balance sneakers, was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal Street John knits pantsuit. Her hair was styled perfectly, and she wore a pair of diamond earrings that easily cost more than my first car. My father was standing at the concierge desk, his back to me. He wore a tailored Brioni jacket and held a bespoke leather duffel bag. The slump in his shoulders, the one he always complained about after woodworking, was gone. He stood with the rigid, commanding posture of a military general. "Thomas and Margaret Patterson," Agent Campbell announced, his voice echoing through the quiet lounge. A dozen FBI agents materialized from the hallways and side rooms, their hands resting cautiously on their holstered weapons. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to violate the RICO Act." My father froze. He didn't panic. He didn't drop his bag. He slowly turned around, his eyes sweeping over the agents with cold, calculating precision. Then, his gaze landed on me. His eyes, the same eyes that had crinkled with joy when I hit my first home run, were dead. There was no love in them. There was only the icy annoyance of a predator whose trap had failed. Amory, my mother said. Her voice was steady, utterly devoid of the maternal warmth she had faked on the phone just hours earlier. You shouldn't be here. You were going to let them kill me, I said, my voice cracking, tears blurring my vision. You set me up to be murdered by a cartel so you could steal their money. It's business, Amory, my father said, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive jacket. He sounded like he was discussing a bad quarterly earnings report. We built you. We gave you the intellect, the seed capital, the entire infrastructure of your life. You were an investment, an asset. And sometimes, assets need to be liquidated to protect the primary shareholders. I staggered backward, feeling as though I had been physically struck. I'm your son. My mother offered a chilling, patronizing smile. Don't be naive, darling. You were a perfectly clean slate. We needed a face with no criminal history, no ties to our past in logistics, and enough ambition to build a high-volume trading firm without asking too many questions. You played your part beautifully. Agent Campbell stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. As my father complied, turning his wrists over to the federal agent, he locked eyes with me one last time. A cruel, triumphant smirk played on his lips. You think you've won because we're in cuffs, Amory, my father sneered. You think your brilliant lawyer saved you? Roy stepped up beside me, his expression unreadable. We didn't just route the money through your credentials, my mother added, her voice dripping with venom as an agent patted her down. We needed a secondary failsafe, someone who had authorized access to your personal devices but wasn't on the firm's payroll. Someone the cartel would logically target next if they couldn't find you. My blood ran cold. The air left my lungs in a violent rush. We wired the 20 million from the holding accounts directly into a blind trust, my father said, relishing the horror spreading across my face. A trust we set up 6 months ago in the name of your fiancée, Sarah. We used her laptop to authorize the final transfer. As far as the cartel is concerned, she's the one who robbed them. No, I gasped, pulling my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking so violently, I dropped it onto the polished marble floor. They already have her location. Amory, my father smiled as the agents began to lead him away. The cartel doesn't use the FBI to settle their debts. You have about 20 minutes before they pay Sarah a visit. 20 minutes, my father's words echoed in my skull, a sickening mantra that drowned out the hum of the idling jet engines. I scrambled across the polished marble floor of the terminal, my fingers desperately clawing for the phone I had dropped. Sarah, I gasped, finally gripping the device. I dialed her number, my thumb slipping on the glass screen. The line rang. Once, twice. Then, the automated chirp of her voicemail. She's not answering, I yelled, spinning around to face Royce and Agent Campbell. She's at our townhouse in Lincoln Park. She works from home on Thursdays. We have to call the Chicago police. We have to send someone right now. Agent Campbell was already barking into his radio. Dispatch. This is Supervisory Special Agent Campbell. FinCEN badge 8492. I have a credible, imminent threat to life at. He pointed at me. 2420 North Burling Street. Lincoln Park, I shouted. 2420 North Burling Street, Chicago. I need local SWAT and any available Bureau tactical units on site immediately. Suspects are heavily armed cartel operatives, likely a localized cleanup crew. We are wheels up from Mitchell in 2 minutes. Campbell grabbed me by the shoulder, his grip like a vice. Let's move, Amory. The chopper is still spun up. We sprinted back across the tarmac, leaving my parents surrounded by federal agents. I didn't look back at them. The people who had raised me were dead to me. The only family I had left was in the crosshairs of a Sinaloa hit squad. The helicopter ride back over Lake Michigan was an agonizing blur of sheer terror. The 40-minute flight felt like descending into hell. Royce sat across from me, his usually composed face drawn tight. He was furiously typing on an encrypted tablet, drafting preliminary injunctions and immunity clauses, preparing for the legal hurricane that would follow if we survived the afternoon. "The cartel cleaners won't operate like street thugs, Amory," Campbell said, shouting over the roar of the rotors as the Chicago skyline pierced the grey clouds ahead of us. "They are professionals. They will breach the house quietly, secure the target, and attempt an extraction or a staged suicide to make it look like she took the guilt of the stolen 20 million. If Chicago SWAT gets there first, they'll form a perimeter. And if they don't?" I asked, my voice cracking. Campbell didn't answer. He just checked the magazine of his service weapon. We touched down on a municipal helipad near Belmont Harbor. A Chicago police interceptor was waiting, its lights strobing violently against the overcast sky. We threw ourselves into the back, and the cruiser tore down Lakeshore Drive, weaving through afternoon traffic with terrifying speed. When we turned onto North Burling Street, my heart stopped. The quiet, tree-lined street of million-dollar brownstones had been turned into a militarized zone. Black armored vehicles blocked the intersections. Heavily armed SWAT officers in olive-drab tactical gear were stacked up behind the iron gates of my home. I threw the car door open before we even came to a complete stop, sprinting toward the police barricade. "Sarah, is she inside?" A uniform officer intercepted me, shoving me back. "Whoa, buddy, stay back." "I'm Special Agent Campbell, FBI," Campbell roared, flashing his gold shield as he jogged up beside me. "This is the homeowner. What is the status of the breach?" The SWAT commander, a burly man with a radio strapped to his chest, jogged over. "We got here 4 minutes ago, Campbell. The front door's biometric lock was bypassed, and the secondary deadbolt was drilled out. It was a professional entry. We have thermal imaging showing 3 heat signatures on the second floor. 2 are moving. 1 is stationary in the master bedroom. They have her." I choked out, my knees threatening to buckle. "You have to go in. If we breach loud, they might execute her," the commander said grimly. "We're setting up a sniper on the roof across the street, but the blinds are drawn." Royce stepped forward, his sharp legal mind pivoting to tactical strategy. "Commander, the men inside believe they are securing a woman who stole $20 million from their cartel. They don't want her dead yet. They want the encryption keys to the blind trust. They are going to interrogate her." Campbell nodded. "He's right. They need her laptop and her passwords. That buys us time." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the alleyway behind the townhouse. The radio on the commander's chest crackled. "Alpha Team. We have movement at the rear garage exit. A black Suburban is attempting to breach the alley perimeter." "They're trying to extract her," the commander yelled. "Execute breach. Go, go, go." The ensuing 90 seconds were a symphony of calculated violence. Stun grenades shattered the front windows of my home, the concussive boom-boom rattling my teeth. SWAT operators flooded through the front door like water from a burst dam. Gunfire short. Controlled bursts erupted from the second floor. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, Royce gripping my arm to keep me from running into the crossfire. The air smelled of cordite and burning drywall. Then, silence. The most terrifying silence of my life. "Status!" Campbell barked into his own radio. "Clear. 2 tangos down. 1 in custody. Target is secured." I didn't wait for permission. I shoved past the barricade and bolted through the shattered front door of my home. The foyer was destroyed, bullet holes riddling the expensive artwork Sarah had picked out in Paris. I took the oak stairs 2 at a time. In the master bedroom, the air was thick with smoke. 2 men in dark tactical clothing lay motionless on the Persian rug. A third was pinned to the floor by 3 SWAT officers, zip ties securing his bleeding wrists. And there, huddled in the corner of her walk-in closet, clutching her knees to her chest. "Sarah!" I screamed, dropping to my knees and sliding across the hardwood floor. She looked up. her face streaked with tears and pale with shock. She had a bruise forming on her cheekbone, and her hands were trembling violently. When she saw me, a sob ripped from her throat, and she threw herself into my arms. "Amory!" she cried, burying her face in my shoulder. They broke in. They kept asking about a trust fund. They said I stole from them. I didn't know what they were talking about. "I know, baby, I know," I whispered, holding her so tightly I thought I might break her. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the dust and gunpowder in her hair. "It's over. You're safe. I've got you." Agent Campbell appeared in the doorway, lowering his weapon. He looked at the shattered room, then at us. "Medical is on the way. You two are going to need a very long debrief, but you're safe now." Later that evening, sitting in the sterile, fluorescent-lit interrogation room of the Chicago FBI field office, Royce Mitchell performed a masterclass in legal defense. With the intercepted transfer keys, the recorded phone call on the burner phone, and Campbell's FinCEN data, Royce secured absolute ironclad immunity for both Sarah and me. We handed over the entire operational infrastructure of Patterson Capital to the federal government. The $20 million was seized by the Treasury. The firm I had built from nothing was dismantled in a matter of hours, relegated to evidence in the largest RICO indictment in Midwestern history. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Patterson, were denied bail. The prosecution revealed they had been laundering money for nearly 3 decades, using my life as their ultimate, pristine cover story. The cartel, realizing they had been betrayed by their own launderers, put out a multi-million-dollar bounty on their heads. My parents were placed in solitary confinement in a supermax facility, completely isolated from the world they had tried to manipulate. I lost my company, my fortune, and my family all in a span of 12 hours. But as I walked out of the federal building late that night, holding Sarah's hand tightly in mine, I realized something profound. The empire I had built was a house of cards sitting on a foundation of lies. But the woman walking beside me, and the freedom we still possessed, were real. 2 years have passed since that day on the tarmac. Sarah and I are married now, living quietly in Seattle, under new names. Patterson Capital is a memory, dissolved by the feds. My parents are serving consecutive life sentences in federal prison. I survived the ultimate betrayal, but some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by the chilling silence on the other end of the line.